Thank you for that introduction. I was saying to Mara earlier that it kind of feels like it's 1990 and I've been asked to moderate a panel on how the internet will reshape marketplaces. It's that big of a topic, and it's quite wide-ranging. So we're going to try to take pieces of it today and parse out what the implications will be for the marketplaces that you all work on. So just by way of introduction, my name is Lauren Jackson. I'm a writer and strategist at the New York Times, where I've covered the emergence of generative AI in this current hype cycle and its implications for white-collar work. And let's turn to our panelists. So Mara Larson-Richard built an AI company in the last AI boom, Civitas Learning, and was CEO of Ada's List, the largest talent marketplace in Europe for women in tech. She's currently on the board of Arlequin, a fintech marketplace. And then we have Luke. Luke Pappas is a partner at NEA, where he is focused on investing in the next wave of great AI companies at both the application and infrastructure layers. And finally, Yannet is CFO and partner at Morantix, Europe's largest AI ecosystem and early-stage investor. She is also co-founder of the Morantix AI Campus, a co-working space with 80 teams and close to 1,000 members, working in artificial intelligence and machine learning, located in the heart of Berlin. So I want to start our conversation today with a topic that we are all familiar with, which is ChatGPT. And it's likely the reason that you chose to attend this session. So you've all heard the hype. Generative AI is going to reshape everything: our jobs, our work, our schools, our governments, or so they say. But I want to open this panel with a frame, which is that AI isn't new. It already has been reshaping marketplaces for years, powering product recommendations, increasing operational efficiency. And ChatGPT really just put us in a place where the general public has a glimpse into how AI will continue to reshape marketplaces. So with that as kind of our starting point, I wanted to turn to the panelists and have all of you weigh in briefly on the question of what is hype about this moment of the hype cycle around generative AI, and what is truly transformative for marketplaces. Mara, do you want to start?
Sure. So, I agree with you in terms of being invited to speak on this is a bit like, being invited to speak on the internet in the 90s. As Bill Gates said, if you invent a breakthrough in AI, that would be worth 10 Microsofts. So what we're facing today is a disruption that is much greater than anything we've faced to date. And I think in terms of looking at what is hype and what is opportunity, I think there's phenomenal opportunity when we look at marketplaces, because we not only have huge opportunities to create marketplaces in lots of areas that we haven't seen, generationally changing companies quite yet, like home services. We have some companies, we don't have anything on the scale of necessarily like Amazon, for instance. But I think in terms of hype, I think we're looking at, this will take us a lot longer than we anticipate it's going to take. And so it's very easy to look at this news and to say, everything's going to change. I've missed the boat. Like, I was in the last AI hype cycle. We heard a lot of the same rhetoric. And I think, being here, thinking about this, talking about it, looking at how you can take your company through this disruption and make the most of this moment, this will be a generational change that will go on for not just our generation, but many generations to come. What would you think?
Yeah, I actually think it's a helpful way to frame it because, first of all, at NEA, we've been investing in AI startups for the last decade. But it's really true. If you think about what ChatGPT has done for this category, it's put it on the map for the entire world, which is good and bad. I think you've seen, you mentioned the word hype on the investing side. That means valuation, and valuations for AI backed companies are probably at the peak right now across the broader tech landscape. But on the plus side, it's bringing a bunch of talent into this category, which I think is really important. And I think we are seeing some very interesting applications. Look, the last 5 years, there have been, I think, two very, across not just tech, but more just across, culture, hype cycles. One was around Web3 and crypto, which kind of took hold around the COVID lockdowns, and now we're living through this generative AI hype cycle. And I think the difference is some of the applications that we're seeing today, they're a lot more tangible. Like, these are real use cases. You think about like GitHub Copilot, for example. I don't know the exact stat today, but a few months ago, it was about 30% of code that was checked in on a GitHub repo was written by Copilot. Like, that's amazing as a developer. That's a huge efficiency gain. We have a portfolio company that just launched a new marketing campaign, and the entire content library that they came out with, all done in Midjourney. And it took them like an hour, right? This was, again, amazing efficiency gains. So I think we're seeing some very interesting products. On the hype piece, though, I do, like, one thing that we're very focused on at NEA is thinking about defensibility. And we might talk about it more on this panel later, but I think we are seeing some applications that have gotten amazing traction, but that are, we will use the word wrapper, like a wrapper around an LLM that is not necessarily owned by the company, but you're just an interface on top of that. And I think you can, that's an important thing to think through as an entrepreneur or as an investor is, what is the defensibility of this platform? Is it just a nice interface to a more powerful tool that then can get competed away? Or do you have like a very concrete competitive advantage? But I'm excited about this wave of new startups, and certainly the implications that the technology has for companies that are in our portfolio, and then for ones that we hope to meet, and ultimately invest in someday. So.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I look at the word hype now from a builder's perspective, and for me, hype always stands for attention and excitement. And I think what you then make out of it, and what ultimately also results out of it, is up to you, up to us. But I think it's a good environment to actually start something, because it provides opportunities, as you said.
Yeah. We've spoken a lot about hype, but Luke, I appreciated you getting granular about what that means for valuations. And just a stat that I saw on that was quite striking was in the first half of 2023, funding for generative AI startups reached $15.3 billion. The big number doesn't mean a lot, but for context, that's nearly 3 times the total for all of last year. So we really are seeing that translation. And we're seeing it shift from AI being not the proprietary domain, but really being most of the innovation being located within platform companies that had the data to train large language models and the resources to test and implement novel AI applications in their operations, to seeing that trickle down into startups and SMEs. So I want to start though first with these platform companies, and I'll turn it to you, Luke. As I just said, Amazon, Walmart, eBay, they've had the resourcing to train and develop these large language models. So I would love for you to just give us a high-level overview of what that has meant for marketplaces and what advantages that has had for buyers and sellers.
I think as a marketplace, or just as even if you're not a marketplace business, I think the advantage that you have in working with some of these companies is that they have done the heavy lifting for you. Like, there have been a few companies that have raised venture dollars to try and build LLMs. The reality is, like, you raise $100 million, that's going to last you 6 months of training, like the actual GPU cycles to train your algorithms, and then you're out of money, right? The advantage of a Facebook or Microsoft is they have billions of dollars of cash on their balance sheet to eat this cost for you as a startup, so that you can then leverage those algorithms through API calls and incorporate them into your product. So if I'm a marketplace, I think one of the big advantages is in search, right? I think a core value as a marketplace is you're connecting supply and demand and servicing the relevant results to a buyer, or servicing a relevant buyer to a seller. And that matchmaking piece is really how you're adding value in whatever the market is that you're transacting in. And search is a core part of that. And one of the, I think maybe the biggest impact that AI has had for this specific use case is in improving search. And so, if I'm a marketplace business, I can now incorporate these models into my company through API calls, and I get that benefit without having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in training my own model. That to me is a huge advantage. On the flip side, I think building. If I'm a founder today, I'm starting a new company. I think you actually do have a competitive advantage against some of these large companies. Not so much in training the actual models, but in building AI native businesses from day one. I think that it's a lot easier to build going forward than it is to try and make a product that was built 10, 15 years ago AI compatible today. And so I think like competitively, that's probably where you have an advantage as a startup. But I think just leveraging the power of these models as a company through an API call is a huge advantage, and I think it's a service that these companies have done like for the overall ecosystem, and making certainly it's in their best interest to have like these models and to build them and offer them, because they're going to get paid for, API access fees and everything. But I think the actual services that they provide are also quite good for the users, for the companies that are offering these marketplace models. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I saw a lot of nodding specifically on the topic of supporting AI native companies in their early stage development. So just on that point, Luke, again, we've spoken about how AI is already helping your portfolio companies automate workflows, improve ideation for marketing, and write code more efficiently, as well as training and onboarding employees. So really for anyone who wants to pick this up, I would just love for you all to weigh in on how you are helping the companies that you work with and the founders that you work with identify use cases for AI in their businesses.
Yeah, so for us, all of the companies that we build at Merantix and ultimately also invest in are AI native companies. This is also why I was nodding when you were basically using the word AI native. And I think when it's about building an AI native company, for me, it's not about technology first and actually say, okay, you have all these new models. It's more about in the specific domain, because we build application companies at Merantix. So I have a founder who has a certain domain expertise, and they look at their domain, their problems, respectively, the solutions that can be incorporated there, and then later down the road, actually, once they have found a huge solution, they see, okay, how can we now leverage AI to make this even bigger and to actually make it possible in the end?
Mm.
Yeah. And, building on that, Civitas was an AI native company in the last hype cycle, and I think one of the things that you can leverage from a large technology player perspective is that large technology companies augment customer behavior at scale. And so really looking at not only how can you build on top of the technology stack that they are creating for the ecosystem, but also how they're augmenting all the expectations and the behaviors of your customer set so that it's easier for you to kind of take advantage of essentially that change in behavior is super important. And that's something that we found was incredibly expensive for us to build at Civitas and it was a huge challenge for us, was not recognizing what an advantage that was in the earliest days. And then, as we shifted towards understanding that advantage, it unlocked like a tremendous amount of growth. And that's something that now as an angel investor, I spend quite a bit of time with native AI companies in this boom, kind of looking at unpacking like those lessons from that last cycle, and thinking through like the implications that we saw and how similar a lot of these signals were for the AR/VR hype cycle and the blockchain Web3 hype cycle that we see, because there really is this convergence of technology that's coming between a number of trends, which is super exciting, I think, for all of us in this room.
Yeah.
And I'll just add one thing, just from a board perspective. So, at NEA we're predominantly a lead investor, and we join the boards of the companies we back. And so the feedback that we've given to our companies specifically on this topic is that we say, look, it's worth taking 20% of the capital that you would spend, and 20% of the time that your team is like, you as a CEO, for example, you're allocating capital and time, right, to your team. What we said is take 20% of that and invest it just in exploring like these new AI applications. It might be you might be less efficient over the next 2 or 3 months in doing this, but over the next 2 to 3 years, the efficiency gains you're going to get from having these technologies as a part of your operational stack are going to be well worth that investment. And then the other thing that we do is we see a high volume of companies just as a nature of our business, and we'll try and send the ones to our to our portfolio companies, say, hey, try this product, and they'll give us feedback, and maybe it's helpful for the investing side of it. But I think like the takeaway point that I wanted to communicate is I think that is a very worthwhile thing to do. It might be, in the short term, it might feel like it's inefficient. It's an inefficient use of cash or an inefficient use of your company's time. You might miss a quarter as a result of it. But I think the gains you get over the next 2 to 3 years from being, again, AI native are well worth it. So that's the last point I would offer on that.
Yeah, I sometimes find it difficult to define the term, what is an AI company really, right? And I actually believe starting a company now or building a company today, I think it actually is a lot about just including AI in your values or just in your daily thinking and vision, because I see a lot of companies that have, like, in theory or in the beginning said didn't have anything to do with AI, which is totally fine. And now that it's been more of a topic, they all of a sudden think, okay, how can I include it, and how can I actually make use of the data? And they might have very, very powerful data, but actually over time, that we as investors, entrepreneurs, make sure that the people we work with, the young talents, that they start thinking about that in the beginning without actually labeling them as an AI company or whatsoever. They can build their amazing problem or product without even mentioning that, but just include it in their core of what they're doing.
Yeah, actually, that reminded me of an example. We have a company in our portfolio, our healthcare portfolio, called Radiology Partners. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that company, but they have rolled up a lot of radiology centers across the U.S. and other parts of the world. These are the places you go to get an X-ray or an MRI, and then that image is then scanned by your doctor, and you get feedback on what is wrong with your body. They were not an AI. This is like a 10-plus-year-old company, and they were not an AI company when they were started. And out of a board conversation about AI and hey, how should we be leveraging this? We think, what is the asset value this company has today? Well, it's an amazing data set of all these images that we have saved and marked with the symptoms of what the scan, and then what was the outcome, right? A perfect opportunity for you now to train a model on this data set and augment a radiologist who's now that much more powerful in the job because they have all this data benchmarked and archived and now at your fingertips. And I think it's a great example of the point you were making, where you might not be an AI company to start, but think about what is your advantage, what are your assets, and if you have a data asset, that is a great way to sort of train and then offer a product to the market.
Yeah. Can you just say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a really important point to hit on. Your company likely is not going to be developing its own large language model, but it could have proprietary data that is a huge asset to you. So how would you all recommend, or how would you advise the companies that you're working with to identify those proprietary data sets that could be of huge value?
I'll kind of go with some quick thoughts, and then maybe you guys have more developed thoughts afterwards. But I'm going to bring it back to marketplaces. We have a company in our portfolio called Perplexity AI. I mentioned the word wrapper earlier. Perplexity, in a way, is a wrapper on top of these large language models for search. It's consumer search. But one of the points of differentiation that they have in their pitch, and we at NEA think is a pretty compelling idea, is that just through the search query itself, you almost know what the user is looking for better than the user can write the query that they're putting in the text box. So in other words, part of the value of Perplexity is taking an input query, and then they have an algorithm behind the scenes that is editing that query to then put into whatever it is that the model that's going to be giving an output, and then generating that response back to the user. But it might not be exactly what you thought you were asking for, but they know your intent better than you almost do yourself, right? So if I think about it as a marketplace, you know what people are searching for, as an example. You see these queries put into your platform. You know pricing. You see almost everything. It's the one layer that connects every part of the market. And so in that, I think thinking about, okay, where are the unique insights? How can I add value to a consumer, or how can I add value to a seller in a way that maybe before wasn't as obvious, but if you just take a step back and think, just kind of benchmark, tick off, what are all the places that I have a compelling proprietary data set? And for Perplexity, it was the search query. That was the layer that they got that no other, they have the query and they see the output, right, across all these different models. That for them was their sort of point of competitive advantage. I don't know what that is. It's going to be specific to whatever market you're servicing, but I think thinking back about where do I have this holistic view, and then applying that from a data lens, I think is probably the most compelling thing you can do in terms of building long-term value as a marketplace, leveraging AI algorithms and technology as a part of your solution.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Yeah. Oh,
no, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, good.
I agree with you. I think there's really interesting opportunities that are going to come for how we shift search behavior. I split my time between San Francisco and London now, and I was just in San Francisco last week, and I met a company called Korea AI, and one of the most compelling things about them was how they have kind of reoriented prompt engineering within their product, which is Midjourney-esque, in terms of like really trying to interpret exactly like what did you mean as a user, and how do we give you back like some images and some suggestions around a prompt, and it mimics kind of how you would go about a creative session as a creative director in an ad agency, right? Look, well, let's try it this style, let's try it with this color, let's try it in this way. And it was really interesting and really compelling. And I think about that in the context of marketplaces, as all of you will understand your customer in a deeper way using this technology, and how you can think about putting together like a really compelling end-to-end user journey, essentially. And I think especially given, we heard earlier about Gen Z is now the largest population of consumers. They're a really interesting population of consumers in terms of being like actually more loyal to brands and willing to spend a bit more, which is different from millennials and Gen X. If they feel like they have a relationship, and this technology is going to allow us to have hyper-personalization around your entire user journey in a very different way, with a set of consumers who are used to, or digital natives, right? They're used to feeling value and an emotional connection in a technological setting, which I think is super compelling.
Yeah, I think the hyper-personalization point is fascinating, and there's so many ways we could go with it in terms of the ethical implications from a data security perspective, but also all of the amazing advantages in terms of tailoring your products. But before we go into that, the risks and trade-offs, Mara, I want to stay with you. And you said that you split your time between San Francisco and London, and you, I think, have a unique view into both the American and European ecosystems here. So while keeping it friendly, because we are in Europe, what would you say are some of the key differences?
There are phenomenal differences between Silicon Valley and the European ecosystem. I think they each have their own strengths. They have their own weaknesses. It's challenging to compare them to a certain extent because they're so different in terms of age. And so ultimately, Silicon Valley is a much older, much more developed ecosystem, which I think is always important to keep in mind when you're talking about the differences between the two of them. There are opportunities for Europe to kind of leverage understanding what is great about Silicon Valley and how we bring more of that here. And I also think there's ways for Silicon Valley to kind of learn about what it means to kind of incubate other ecosystems and help other countries grow these ecosystems. One of the things that I find most compelling about spending time in San Francisco is how much founder currency exists there. I think founders really are like the driving force in a way that I think we're still adapting to in Europe to a certain extent. I think we're still a very investor-driven ecosystem in Europe, which can create challenges because ultimately in Silicon Valley, like we talk a lot about it's important to listen to investors, but ultimately listen to your customers. Like you need to build something that your customers want, not necessarily build something that your investors want. Like, no offense, Luke, or Jeanette, but right, like
that's a good point, though, and I agree with you.
That's important. And I think that we're still developing that muscle here in Europe. I would encourage anyone who works in technology to come to San Francisco, even if you're not raising money at this moment in time, to kind of experience it, to learn more about what's being built, how people are building technology there. And similarly, when I'm at events in San Francisco, I encourage people to come to Europe and look at the ecosystem from this perspective as well.
Luke, do you guys?
I have a few things to add because, so I recently made the move. I am American, I'm from California. That's like my favorite place in the world, but I live in London now. Which is an amazing city also. It's just different than California.
It's not as warm. I can say that I live there.
It's not as warm, that's true.
Luke and I are the reverse. I grew up in London and now spend my time in California, so.
But I started my time at NEA in our Menlo Park office. And there's a few things I wanted to say in terms of differences between the sort of American way of pitching a company and what I've noticed here in Europe. And then also as it relates to AI, and I think marketplaces too, the two things I wanted to call out. The first one, when I've met founders in the US, it's always, here's my 10-year vision, here's my billion-dollar opportunity, and like, I don't care about the next 2 years, how I'm gonna get there, but I know in 10 years, I'm gonna be here. And then you'll hear a pitch for a company here, and it'll be, okay, my next 18 months, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, and I'm gonna hire these 4 people, and we're gonna go sell to that company. but you have no, like, you never get like, here, my market is this big and I'm gonna like dominate this space. I think neither side of those is like healthy. I think a balance is probably the best thing. But as an investor, I had to really shift like what I was looking for, because that, like, stylistically, it's a big difference in terms of how companies are presented. So that was the first thing I was gonna call out. Second thing is, I actually think, like, as it relates to marketplaces, I'll use an example of, there's a company in the US called Whatnot, one of the fastest growing companies in consumer, a great example of a very successful marketplace company. There's several competitors to Whatnot, and there's one in France that is probably the largest competitor to Whatnot. And we met this company, and I think they have a very compelling like pitch in terms of why they're going to be successful here, because culturally, like, as a marketplace, you're servicing, again, buyers and sellers, but you have to know how, like, the nuances of how those two parties are going to be doing business together. What do they value? And, like, to use the example of Whatnot, they've tried to come to Europe, and I think they've had some challenges in that, because, again, like, the products that are relevant to within a given country are different than what they're used to selling into the U.S. The currency is different, like, their languages are different. So there is, I think, again, you have to like be mindful of who you're servicing, and I think that is, people talk all the time about like investing in Europe. How do you go to the U.S.? A U.S. company, how do you come to Europe? And it's a lot harder, I think, than just like opening an office somewhere and going and doing something. And then the last thing I was going to say, as it relates to AI, I actually think Europe, there's a lot of talent here. Like France probably, and Paris specifically. Facebook, Meta, majority of their AI team is based in Paris. Almost, I'd say like 80-90% of the AI companies that we talk about at NEA are European or like and predominantly in Paris. I know we're in Berlin today. There's a lot of great AI companies here too, but I do think that there's just a lot of, like, look, talent is one of the most important things when you're building a company, and certainly right now in AI, there is a massive shortage, because like it hasn't been as hot of a space before. And it's a talent grab right now. So many companies, everyone trying to hire great people. And I think you have an advantage if you're an AI-based company based here to hire some of the best talent. So that was my last point I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, being the Berlin representative, I probably also have to say something. I think for me, it's not about, okay, Europe is better or the US is better. I think two things to add to that. First, I think it's a lot about being aware of differences, because then I know where to get the opposite from what I'm used to, flying to SF, flying to New York or other destinations. And second, I actually think it's a positive thing that certain companies are built or started from different ecosystems. Because, for example, if you're building something new, no one has done it before, the go-to-market is like definitely not obvious. So having multiple players approaching a problem with a different go-to-market, and that can also be a different geography, I think that's a very good thing, and for me, it increases the likelihoods of success.
I agree with that, and just to touch on the talent point, I think there is a huge land grab right now, or talent grab right now, around technical talent, and that is still phenomenally important, but I think on the point of hyper-personalization, like a lot of this is going to be won or lost on how good your user experience is, and it's one of the things that I see that is a mistake that we made in the last AI boom, and I think we are continuing to perpetuate in this one, is thinking that engineers are ultimately like the competitive resource, and I think we really need to think about, product managers, UI, like salespeople, all the other people who are going to create that emotional bond between your company and your customer, and we need to be hiring a lot more of them.
Yeah. I'm mindful we have a little over 10 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to turn it to you all. And this is a big one, so it's hard to do rapid fire, but if we can try to do it rapid fire, that would be great. So all of you have seen the joint statement that was put out by tech leaders, including Elon Musk, calling AI a profound risk to humanity. And that raises lots of regulatory questions, which these leaders themselves, like Sam Altman, are simultaneously pushing for. So there are huge questions around ethics, safety, and bias. And to that point, I wanted you all to weigh in on, what is the primary safety or ethical consideration that you all are thinking about as you make investments? What are kind of the pitfalls or warning signs that you are looking for in evaluating these investments?
Yeah, so we always look at it or depending on the use case, not so much, okay, is this company using computer vision or LLMs or whatsoever, so what is the actual use case? And then depending on that, what are actually the sensibilities of a certain case, and then how does a company then need to take care of regulation? I think we like highly regulated cases because in the end it's also the high impact ones, or some of them are very impactful. And we ourselves have also co-founded the Federal AI Association because we can also in Europe not be happy about the Europe's take on regulation, but instead we try to also share our voice and try to actually shape it with the opinions of us, but also what we're hearing from our companies.
Yeah, I think your point on focusing on the product and the use case is a good one. For us, we think about the data, where does it come from, and how is it being used. I think especially in Europe I think is leading in the world around consumer data privacy and protection. And I think that's a very real challenge, especially look, if you're in an AI marketplace, you have a ton of consumer data that you can or cannot, transact on. So that's a real risk, and you have to account for that. I think it's important to have that type of focus in your company. And we also think about the use, the use of the data. What is the output? What is the product? There are certain things that we just cannot invest in at NEA as a function of our LP agreements. So there's companies today that are helping you if you're a sports bettor or if you're gambling, you want to get an advantage in the market. AI, great use case for that. Ton of data out there, train an algorithm to generate maximum return, but we just wouldn't invest in that. Yeah, maybe that's I'll end there, I guess.
Great, thank you.
I have a slightly different or philosophical answer to this, which I think it's actually fairly easy to be an AI doomer around all of this. It's really easy to get all excited about the fear and how terrible all of this is going to be. And I think that is sometimes I think is a little intellectually lazy. And I think what's really hard is to look at the future and to look at these technologies and to think about what is the absolute optimal opportunity and what does an amazing future look like, and what are the specific steps that we need to take in order to get to that incredible future, and what steps could I take right now? And I think as technologists, I think our job is actually to think on that side, what is possible? How are we going to make that happen? That does mean taking into account what the challenges are going to be. But I'm clearly an AI optimist, and so I kind of reject the doomer view of this.
Thank you, Mara. I think that's a really nice note to end this section on. Okay, so I want to turn it to you all, and I think we could do this by, if you have a question, I think I'll try to group a couple together. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll ask probably 3, and then we can try to pull some of the themes together and turn it to the panelists.
On the stage. Amazing.
I think there's a question there.
Should I ask the question now, or are you going to group them later on?
Sorry?
Should I ask the question now, or are you?
Yeah,
Okay,
let's ask a few questions, and then we'll
Okay,
turn it to the
sounds good.
panelists.
So the last 12 months have seen a lot of attention focused on large language models. Are there any aspects of AI that are being ignored that shouldn't be right now?
Okay, aspects. Great, thank you. And then we had one right here.
Yeah, maybe this is a question to Luke. You said there's a lot of opportunity in search at marketplaces when it comes to AI. Do you have any good examples of companies that actually nailed it in the recent year or years?
Okay, and then one more. Do we have one more question, or should we start there? Okay, let's start there. So first, aspects of AI that are being ignored. Who wants to take it?
I think there's a number of aspects of AI that are being ignored, but the one that's most prominent to me is this convergence of technologies. So I look at how is blockchain going to intersect with AI? I see a lot of point solutions on the market at this point. In theory, right, the idea behind a point solution is like, we're just going to land and expand. We're going to grab a certain part of the market, and then we'll build out the end-to-end. That is a lot harder than I think people are recognizing. And I think actually thinking through like how these multiple technologies converge is something that's being pretty heavily overlooked.
Yeah, one idea that I just had, because I haven't seen it, but I do think it's a big potential use case. This is around like consulting and services. We use the word AI native, and let's say you're not let's say you're a 20-year-old company and you've got an established business model, but you hear about this thing, ChatGPT. You hear about this thing like Llama model or DALL-E or whatever, right? You're like, what is that? How do I incorporate it into my business? There are consulting firms that will do tech consulting. Like McKinsey, BCG. You hire a consultant, they come in for a month, they evaluate your business. But I don't think anyone has really, no one has taken over, hey, this is the AI consultancy. We're going to tell you, the best ways to incorporate these models into your business. That, to me, I think is underinvested in. And then I also think, there's a company called LangChain. I don't know if folks are familiar, but I think that model that they have, again, they don't build any of this, specific models, or they have effectively chained them all together, right? So if you want a use case, let's say you want to have a text box or something in your app, they have a plugin for that. There's a bunch of other plugins that they offer. I think if you're finding ways to connect multiple models or multiple products in AI, to me is where you're going to see these exponential use cases. And that's it just takes time to develop those things. And so maybe it isn't that it's not being focused on, but I just don't think we've seen much yet there. And now I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, thank you. I might be a bit biased because AIs are bread and butter, daily bread and butter. I think two areas that are still falling a bit short. I think AI in education, not entrepreneurs not building edtech companies, but in our traditional education, I think it should be more talked about AI and how students and kids can actually make use of it first, and then second, I think it's a topic right now, but it will become a more important and more transparent topic. Definitely is explainability, just so actually, putting open how the models do take decisions.
Great. And then Luke, we have this second
Yeah, I thought about
question.
this one. I still don't have a good answer for you. This is part of what the opportunity is, right? If you're a marketplace, I think if you're a new one, this is how you win. You have a better search experience. We have a company in our portfolio called Branch, which does deep linking across mobile apps. I think they have some really, I'm biased, it's a portfolio company, but they have some really interesting things I think that will dramatically improve in-app searches and also the search experience across multiple apps. If you are a consumer, the example that they use, let's say you order a certain thing on Amazon, then you order something on Deliveroo, and then you go to another search, you should be able to tie all that search data together, but because it's in multiple apps, there is no easy way to do that. But with Branch and this deep linking across app technology, you can finally do that now. So again, this is unlocking data that was once disparate and siloed and now is together, so you can have a holistic view across it. This is again the opportunity, right? Think about what apps do you love that has a great search experience, which ones do you not love, and the ones that you don't love, that's probably where you should be building. I don't have a better answer than that. So,
Great. We just have time for one more question if anyone has one. Okay. If not, thank you all. And I have a disclosure before we close, which is, as I was prepping for this panel, I went to ChatGPT and I asked it the question, if you were going to moderate a conversation around AI and marketplaces, what would you ask the panelists? And it came up with some pretty good questions. And I thought I was going to tell you right now that actually I used some of the questions, and so it was already being helpful in my job. I did not end up using any of the questions. So I think the takeaway is, while it's helpful for inspiration, we're still a long way off from full adoption, and I've still got a job. So thank you all, and thank you to the panelists.